Welcome to Cambridge Inside Out. My name is Robert Winters, and this is sort of a somber week this way because many of you may know this past I believe it was Friday, uh, we lost one of our Cambridge City Councilors, Joan Pickett, um, and wanted to certainly spend some time tonight talking about that. The I mean, I had suspected that something was wrong when Joan missed the August 5th city council meeting, and there was no explanation offered. And a few days later, I spoke to the mayor and said, well, I was asking because there was some votes missed. I thought maybe votes could be retaken. And Denise gave me, sort of a cryptic answer. I think many of the councilors were, there was some understanding to that. Um, they didn't really want to share a whole lot about how serious the situation was. And, and I still don't know some of the detail. I know a little bit, but that's really all. Hopefully we'll hear more from her family. But it was really pretty heartbreaking, actually. I mean, I've known Joan now for, well, I couldn't say probably 15, 20 years at least. Um, Long before there was any notion about wanting to be a political player, run for city council, which she did this last year. Um, so I actually sent messages, trying to contact her saying, are you okay? Are you okay? And I kind of knew something was wrong when I didn't get any messages back because she was always the one to contact me and then, she was always very immediate to respond to me. So it was pretty hard. And it's become sort of a long-standing tradition now. I mean, I heard from fellow Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association person, John Pitkin. He's the one who told me, and again, I wasn't at all surprised. I had really kind of been anticipating hearing horrible news. But then when I went in the house, there was a message from the mayor who, uh, that she seems to take on that role often of being the breaker of the bad news. When Brian Murphy died, he was no longer, he had resigned from the city council, but he was a good friend to all of us. And when he died suddenly, this is after he had been um, taking the job working as the assistant city manager for community development. And that was a real shock. And again, it was Denise who called me to let me know. So it's anyway, it's been sort of a tough few days. We had a gathering of some of the mainstays from the Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association at John Pitkin's house on Sunday evening, which was good. Death is a dreadful thing, and but it is when longtime friends get together and trade stories and recollections and remembrances, it's actually a very good thing. So that was Sunday for me. And I've been hesitant to, I mean, I know others are sort of trying to get really quick to sort of put information and things out in the newspapers and whatnot. I chose to just put a very briefest of announcements up and just wait till I hear from the family. Um, so actually let me just switch over here and just go to the statement from the mayor. I think that's probably worth mentioning here. So, and again, Joan was, she was very actively involved with the Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association for some time. And only relatively recently did her name become associated with some of the controversy over bicycle lanes. I think it's one of the real sad realities is that a lot of the newspaper coverage, from the legitimate press and the semi-legitimate press seem to want to characterize her as nothing other than her association with the bike lane issue. And I thought that was just really wrong-headed and kind of insulting. She's a really, very decent person. And I've ever since she's been elected, I've been over her house several times. Certainly got to know her two dogs, and she bakes some really mean corn muffins as well, I might say too. We had a lot of mutual friends, and it was really, really just sort of hard for all of us. Um, so anyway, it's the the unfortunate task fell to the mayor to put out, some of the word about this. And one of the things, I mean, just to get into, um, some of the practical aspects of this is, by the way, we haven't yet heard of any arrangements for memorial services or anything like that. Um, and, you know, but I know people were contacting me right away saying, okay, what happens next? I mean, when there's a vacancy on the Cambridge City Council or school committee, we have a procedure, well established procedure that determines who would succeed that person. Uh, and straight away, that person will be Cathie Zusy, who is very similar in temperament and positions on most issues, I would say. And that's the vacancy recount procedure is actually designed in such a way that it most probably uh, as a replacement for when in the event of a vacancy, brings us someone of similar positions on things, right? Because it's based on the ballots that help the elected departing councillor, right? So since I have access to the ballot data, it's public record. One of the things I do for a number of reasons, some of which is just it's the way I test the software too, is I and the correctness of the data. When I get the data, the first thing I do is I take the 33 precinct files and I concatenate them, merge them into one file because it's easier to work with. And then I run the same software that the city uses and I rerun the whole election and make sure that everything's identical. It would be kind of wild if it wasn't. But that's how I know the software is working and the configuration file that I wrote is correct. And then the next thing I do after all that is done is I go and I determine who the replacements would be for each of the 9 city councilors and for each of the 6 elected members of the Cambridge School Committee. So I did that last November. So there's no surprise, really, any more than if the president of the United States would die, we know exactly who would replace, namely the vice president. So, it shouldn't be a mystery, though, of course, in years past, when everything was on paper ballots, you wouldn't actually know for sure. You might have some good guesses as to who would replace a departing counselor, you know, but you wouldn't really know until it was really over. Now the procedure, I have to say, I feel sort of dreadful, sort of even just talking about the mechanics of replacement when somebody has so recently died. I mean, the real story is that a good friend died, and it's a hard thing, But city will move on, and we do have to fill vacancies, and we'll be doing that. So anyway, for those who are curious, and I believe at least in at least one newspaper, I have no idea whether it was the Crimson or the Day or the Boston Globe, there was at least somebody told me that there was some false information being put around about how they said that it would be the last person who was defeated would be the person. And that's absolutely false. And it would also be a complete violation of any notion of proportionality in our system. So the way the system works is you take the ballots, in this case it's computer ballot records, and you run a mini count to elect one. So you just take those ballots, the quota. In this case, Joan didn't quite reach the election quota, but it's still a substantial number of ballots, and then you distribute them based on the first available choice amongst continuing candidates. Now, I had actually done this last November, as I said, but um, you know, as many of you may know, one of the candidates from the last municipal election, Greg Morey, actually died on election night. And so even though it wasn't going to really affect the outcome of the vacancy recount, couple of days ago I reran it where it's a very simple piece of code you put in to exclude candidates who either have moved away are not interested in being considered in a vacancy recount, as well as if somebody had passed away, and that has happened at times in the past. So so anyway, I redid it, and of course, so after 15 rounds, Cathie Zusy prevails. I'll actually show you the details of it all. Again, the real story here is of the death of a friend, but I think it is still worthwhile at least understanding, um, uh, how this all works here. So you'll have to pardon me just a little bit, and then I had to switch the tabs in order to um, do this properly. So here we go. So here we go. All right. So the vacancy recount, and as I say, Cathie Zusy will be the one elected. It proceeds in the following manner. Again, this is output from the same software that will be used on when the election commission schedules the vacancy recount. They generally, I don't know whether they'll follow this exactly, but they generally send a letter or some contact all candidates who might be eligible to be a replacement and ask, are you still around and whatever. And then once they know who's available, then they can proceed with the election. So the election commission is busy. Today is actually the party primary day, and they'll be busy counting votes tonight and then doing provisional ballots tomorrow. More on that in a minute. Um, but this is how it'll proceed. So what you see here is the entire list of candidates, and then you click through in the first count here. And again, perhaps because of the association with the bike lane issue, in fact, almost certainly so, you see here when you first distribute ballots according to first available choice. Uh, and you can, by the way, you can notice the excluded candidates at the bottom, which are basically the candidates who were elected, plus anyone who was ineligible. In this case, it includes Greg Morey, and of course, Joan Pickett. And the first person, beneficiary initially is John Hanratty at the very top, and then Cathie, and then Doug Brown, and I'm down there too, at number 5. And then just like we do in the regular count, you just proceed through a series of counts. So if anybody who's sort of defeated by virtue of the fact they had very few, they were write-ins here, the lowest poll, they're defeated, and the ballots are transferred, which doesn't really change a thing. And then, you go through the counts one by one by one. You count out Franz Pierre, transfers a few ballots, and then you count out Peter Shue. You'll notice here that John Hanratty is like 50 votes ahead. All right. And again, this would, create a little, you know, uneasiness, I suppose, in the room if this was done with paper ballots. And then Vernon Walker's counted out at 25 votes, and then the inevitable and problematic Mr. Totten is counted out, and with his defeat, ballots transfer. But again, these are relatively small numbers because generally speaking, anybody who was voting for Joan Pickett would not be voting for certain of these candidates, at least not in any real numbers. When you count on Adrian Klein, again, more ballots, but you'll notice here, John Hanratty is still comfortably in the lead. When you count out Joe McGurk, again, not much of a change. You count out, well, this is where you count out Joe McGurk. And then when you count out Hao Wang, again, you'll notice that there's some of the candidates' slate dynamics are in play here. Joe McGurk, for example, was endorsed by the ABC group, whereas many of the others you see here on the list, really all of the others you see on the list, were all endorsed by the Cambridge Citizens Coalition. So you count out Hao Wang and count out Carrie Pasquarello. Again, that boosts Cathie a little bit. And then when you count me out, that pushes Cathie up within 9 votes of John Hanratty. But the real change is when you then count out Doug Brown. Doug Brown transfers considerably more to Cathie Zusy, putting her ahead of John Hanratty. At this point, Federico Muchnick is 3rd, and again, not even close, but so once those ballots are transferred, then everything is really known. So what we'll see when they go through the official procedure, which will give you identical results to what I'm now showing you, will be a 45 vote margin of Cathie Zusy over John Hanratty. And there is a formal transfer of the remaining ballots, which are then exhausted. All right. So anyway, that's how that procedure would go. Now, let me just step outside here and just say a few things too, which is that, I mean, this is actually a very good procedure for determining who would replace someone, in this case here. And you can kind of see from the dynamics how people who are part of similar slates or whatever would be the ones who would be highly favored and most probably be the one who would replace any departing candidate. But some people argue, and there are some reasons why, and I'll go through some of the history of this shortly, but why there are some potential flaws in this method. In fact, I'll just say straight away, it is possible that if you do better in the main election, then when you're defeated, your ballots may go to a candidate who still needs a lot of ballots to be elected. And then if somebody who did more poorly somebody who did more poorly will transfer a lot of ballots to a continuing candidate. But then if the 10th person counted out is also transferring, that the elected person may actually reach the quota, so that you can't transfer any more ballots. So in a kind of a paradoxical thing, it's actually referred to in the business as a monotonicity violation. What can happen is that if a candidate who does more poorly can actually have a greater chance of being the person to fill the vacancy. Now that doesn't happen this year, by the way, but it certainly happened in the case when Anthony Galluccio replaced Bill Walsh. It has actually happened a couple of times over the history of the city. So you might argue, well, that maybe there is a better way, and there are some other ways that could be done. I think just for the sake of an academic exercise, really, what I thought I might show you here is an an illustration about another method that could be used. Of course, can't do it this way because the charter specifies exactly how must be done. But an alternate way of filling a vacancy would be to simply take all of the ballots. So I ran this a couple of days ago. And you take all the ballots and you simply exclude the candidate, the elected candidate who is no longer available either through death or other reason. And then you just run the election again. So what happens in that situation here is what you see is you simply have, any candidate who's passed away, such as Greg Morey, or in this case, Joan Pickett, excluded. And then you just run the election right from the beginning. Sumbul Siddiqui got the most number one votes. And I'll just sort of kind of zip through it here. But you'll see almost the same election, except that without Joan Pickett, people like Cathie Zusy or John Hanratty may do better. But again, when you get right down to the counting out Doug Brown and then Joe McGurk, when you do Doug Brown and now Joe McGurk, the ballots are going in there, boosting certain, in this case, ABC endorsed candidates. You count out Mr. Totten, and they again go to the left of the left and the crazy among crazies. And then when John Hanratty is counted out, what you see here is that Cathie Zusy is sort of in the ninth slot. And then the final person counted out was Ms. Al-Zubi, who was the last person counted out as well last time. And then that elects everybody, including Cathie Zusy, as the ninth person. So again, I was doing this demonstration here, not just to sort of show off my computer skills or anything, but to say that if you had a different method for choosing a successor, that that in this case, one of the more logical and sensible and simple ways of doing it actually would give you the same results. So people should feel good about the fact that Cathie Zusy will be the person to succeed Joan. I think just maybe the timing being what it is here, maybe what I'll do here is I'll also share with you another little piece of history, right? by the way, if you go to the site where I have all of this stuff, you can also compare it to the official count that's listed there as well. But I don't think we really need to do that now. So some people have asked, well, how has it ever happened that there were vacancies? And of course, the answer is going to be yes. So earlier today, I went through my records. The older records, by the way, I want to really put a special thank to the original creator, the creator of the original Cambridge Inside Out, Glenn Kuchar, who uh, who did a tremendous amount of research, and and I've been and he passed along this file that I've been adding to ever since. So now it's the Kuchar winners file. Uh, and I was able to get all the information about various vacancies. Like one thing I learned this morning was that in 1941, because remember the election happened in November of 1941, but that Pearl Harbor happened a month later. So there were some members of the city council and school committee who entered the armed forces, and there was a special, I didn't know this till this morning, there was actually a special act of the legislature that gave cities and towns a mechanism for having replacing somebody who was on active duty with what was then called an acting member. So, and again, I didn't know this until today. Ed Crane was in the armed forces and was succeeded by Francis Scully as an acting member after the 1941 election. I don't have the specific date when it took place, but and also on the school committee, William Brooks was replaced by Frank Duddy as an acting member. Ralph Robart was replaced by Margaret Kelleher as an acting member as well. In 1947 was the first time somebody actually died in office. It was our Michael Sullivan's grandfather, Mickey the Dude, Michael A. Sullivan, who died in January 1949, which was a full year into the term, and was succeeded by Tom McNamara using the very same procedure that we'll be using perhaps next week or whatever. Robert Ridden on the school committee in 1947 died, and later that year in 1949 was succeeded by I love some of the nicknames, Francis Cheese McGrean. 1951, Francis Sennett died and was succeeded by Tom McNamara. In 1961, Guy Balin, or Don, also known as Don Balin, resigned to work in the Kennedy administration and was then succeeded by Connie Wheeler, who had been elected previously, so it actually just put her back in. 1965, Ed McMahon of the school committee resigned to be a priest and was replaced by John A.P. Good. Again, that was one of those examples where a monotonicity violation, as I was describing earlier, happened. In 1983 council, Lenny Russell, who actually was elected mayor and was the sitting mayor, he died while in office as a city councilor and mayor in June of 1985 and was replaced by Al LaRosa. In 1987, Joe Maynard was a sitting member of the school committee, was reelected, but then he died several weeks after election day. And that vacancy was filled. They didn't fill the vacancy for the remainder of the term. It was only a month. But for the term to which he was then reelected, he was replaced by Tim Toomey, which is the beginning of Tim Toomey's career as an elected official. 1993 council, well, Billy Walsh was on there, and he was actually sentenced to prison in somehow it says here 1995. I think that's supposed to be 1994. I'll correct that later. So when his seat was vacated, that's when Anthony Galuccio was elected. And again, that was a situation very much where Anthony did not as well as Jim McSweeney. And it was the fact that he did not as well actually put him, Anthony at an advantage to replace Billy Walsh. And that actually led to a Supreme Judicial Court decision. There was a lawsuit. I know a lot about it because I was asked to advise, for advice by the lawyers for Jimmy McSweeney. We met up at my Harvard office and we advised one thing, they did another thing. anyway, the SJC did not go with that. Michael Sullivan, Mickey the Dude's grandson, he resigned his seat in 2005, was replaced by David Marr, who had, who then was reelected the following year. And Brian Murphy resigned to take a job at the Commonwealth and eventually worked as in the community development department here back in Cambridge and was replaced by Larry Ward. Emily Dexter was elected in 2019, but was unfairly pressured into resignation, and she was replaced by David Weinstein. Akriti Bambi scored very well in the 2021 school committee election, but then a year later took a job in New York City, was replaced by Carolyn Hunter, and now this year it'll be Joan Pickett, who will be replaced by Cathie Zusy once everything is said and done. So anyway, as we say, where else are you going to learn this information, right? Except right here on Cambridge Inside Out, or if you just give me a call. So so anyway, it's a hard thing. I think it was especially hard on some of Joan's colleagues. I think it was very hard on the mayor, Mayor Simmons, she told me it was also 1 year anniversary of the death of her daughter. And then one of her closest friends, Julia Perez Kennedy, passed away recently, and then Joan, and so it's been a tough time for the mayor, who I consider to be one of my better friends these days. Last thing I'll say here, maybe before taking a break, is to say that I don't appreciate the fact that in the Cambridge Day there was an article that allows, as usually allows, these anonymous commenters who've basically been ripping Joan to shreds because of their advocacy on one side of the bicycle issue. I mean, I could tell you a lot more about Joan Pickett, and she was not defined by the bicycle issue. So for these ne'er-do-wells to be taking advantage of somebody, essentially an obituary, in order to beat somebody up is really unconscionable. And I'm not going to forget it. So and I'll say a few other things about Joan, because those who think, oh, she's just about bike lanes or whatever. I was going through some emails I got from her over the years. When I first contacted her, her interests were in getting advice to people about moving and renovations. It was passing around information about it was a housing proposal over at Shady Hill Square. It was advocacy about Joan Lorenz Park in Mid-Cambridge, and always the organization of the Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association ice cream socials, which would take place every summer. Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association organized candidates nights for every municipal election. Were some of the best ones that were ever done. Kudos to John Pitkin in particular for laying a lot of that out. I got messages, promoting our presence in Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association at the Cambridge River Festival. There were neighborhood sergeant meetings talking about crime and safety. There was they created the Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association News. They put together a yard sale, which I actually still use some of the things I got at the yard sale. There was advocacy over trees in Cambridge, Martin Luther King Day of Service. Some of the development proposals that were coming down in and around Central Square, in the K2C2 process. Some interests in the Harvard Art Museums. There was a controversy many of you will have already forgotten about ethanol trains coming through the city. And a lot of people were very concerned about that. So she was getting a lot of people information about that. We put together the holiday parties every December. There was a lot of back and forth about recycling and zero waste. Plants and gardens. She loved plants, and she had a wonderful garden. And I really feel bad for her two dogs, who are just wonderful, fun little dogs, Bo and Peppy. And again, I could go on. Only much later, really just a few years back, when we got into some discussion about the Inman Square reconfiguration, which had some controversy associated with it. And then only bicycle issues only show up maybe around the very first mention of it around 2017. And then there were plenty of other issues having to do with housing, the charter, zoning, the traffic board, boards and commissions, the city, and after she was elected, I would say that her biggest contribution would have been, she able to complete her term, would have been as having great expertise in dealing with budgets and municipal budgets. I just hope that the city council can step up and fill the gap, um, um, left by Joan's absence. So anyway, I'm going to take just a very artificial break right now, and then I will come back in a few seconds.